All right, our webinar today is Building Healthy and Sustainable Worshiping Communities and Congregations. And this is going to be a case study from Paris Community Church. And we have the Reverend Joel Sherbino, who will be joining us. I'm Karen Plater, Associate Secretary for Stewardship and Planned Giving. Just a quick little bit of protocol for this. Please stay muted and use the chat to ask anything. And you should see there's both a chat and there's a Q&A. If you use either of those, we should get the questions. We're going to monitor them. If it's a question that should be asked during the presentation, we'll try to do so. But most of the quick questions are going to be asked at the end. So if you've got a question that you're asking midway through, be sure to make reference to what you're asking to, not just, can you explain that more? Otherwise, we won't quite know what that is referring to. For those of you who struggle with the chat or the Q&A, we'll also unmute you at the end, and people could, or we'll allow you to unmute at the end, and you can unmute yourself. You can either raise your hand like this, so we'll hopefully see you, but because there's so many people, we'll really see you if you use the little raise hand icon that is there. So, but if we're not hearing you and you see there's a big pause, just unmute yourself and give us a verbal cue as well. This is being recorded. The recording and slides will be available on the webinar section of the presbyterian.ca. Feel free to share it around, particularly if you think, oh, somebody might really be interested in this and they want to attend the next 3 series. Yeah, it would be great to have them join us. And next slide. Okay, just a reminder that this is supported by your gifts to Presbyterian Sharing. One of the goals of Presbyterian Sharing is to equip congregations in Christian education, worship, evangelism, stewardship, communications, youth ministry, and justice work. And I know that Joel is going to check off every single one of these in his presentation today. And we'll just do a brief land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that our congregations across Canada are on the traditional territories of various Indigenous peoples. The Presbyterian Church in Canada national offices are on the traditional territory of the Huron, Wendat, Petun, Seneca, and most recently, the Mississaugas of the Credit Indigenous peoples. We are on a journey of healing and reconciliation between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people. All right. So again, I'm the host for this webinar, and I'm the Associate Secretary for Stewardship and Planned Giving at the Presbyterian Church in Canada. I've been doing this for the past 17, going on 18 years now. And before that, I was the Communications Coordinator for Presbyterian World Service and Development. So I've been around the PCC for quite some time. When I'm not having fun hosting webinars, visiting congregations, or collecting your gifts to Presbyterian Sharing, I love spending time on my farm, where I raised sheep for 20 years, and then I got into the goat business, and I have horses and chickens. And I'll turn over to Joel to introduce himself and then take it away.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Karen, and thank you for everyone who's joining. It's always amazing seeing little windows pop up and some of the names. I'm familiar with some of you, but not all of you, and I just really appreciate it. I feel honored that you are taking time out of your day for the hopefully next 4 weeks to come and spend some time with us, just sharing a little bit about the story of what God is doing at work in the community, in the church that I am serving. So a bit of a background on me. I was born and raised in the Presbyterian church. My father is a retired Presbyterian minister. I graduated from Presbyterian College in McGill. And upon my graduation, I went overseas for 3 years to Malawi with International Ministries. Served there with my wife, got fairly involved in a prison ministry, and then came back to Canada and am serving in Paris Community Church. The name has changed, and we'll get into that in the next couple of weeks. but I've been in Paris for 17 years. I went back to Malawi in 2015, 2016 to get involved in some of the work of international ministries again. And so now I kind of have I have my foot in two camps. I'm pastor of a church here in Paris. I'm there 75% of the time, and then I'm involved as a director of the Malawi prison ministry in Malawi 25% of the time. So I'm married. I've got three awesome kids. I love being active, eating nachos, drinking craft beer, and cheering for the New York Islanders. If I can do all three at the same time, that is a good night for me. So just want to kind of give you a bit of a context. Some of you may be familiar with my church, some may not. It's a congregation that sits in Paris, Ontario. So think southwestern Ontario, about an hour west of Toronto, around Cambridge, Brantford. Still in a fairly rural area, but like many towns in our area, it is growing, and so we're seeing more and more. So I've been here for 17 years, and as I think of my time in Paris, I really see myself as having been the pastor of three different congregations. One when I first arrived, one as we kind of transitioned, and then one that kind of came out of COVID. And a lot of what I'm going to share is the learnings that I have had during my time throughout. So there's just some pictures here to give you a bit more of a glimpse. This is one of our Christmas Eve services. And so it's a congregation that's set in a traditional building. And so the building is about 130 years old. I refer to us as being multi-generational. And we've really seen a transition from a more traditional style to more contemporary. But one of the things that we really see valuable is how do we continue to get connected, not only in building community, but ultimately to connect with our community. And so we're just delighted to see the different people coming, how we're growing, our involvement with youth and with kids, involved with the community in different ways. And I'm gonna talk more about this as we move along in the coming weeks. But of course, we're partners with the prison ministry in Malawi. We have a social enterprise that is involved with the Raw Carrot. And so there's kind of some interesting things happening, and I really hope that this is helpful, and an opportunity for you to at least begin conversations to see kind of where you are at. But to give you a little bit of a feel, I'm actually going to stop sharing, and Grace is going to show just a little. It's about a 3-minute video. We did this at the end of the year as a bit of a year in review, to kind of show our people all the different things that are happening. And hopefully this gives you a little bit more of a feel for who our church is, what we do. So it's not just me as like a talking head. So I'm gonna stop and hand it over to Grace.
Lord, for your mercy never fails me. All my days I've been held in your hand. From the moment that I wake up till I lay my head, oh, I will sing of the goodness of God. And all my life you have been faithful. And all my life you have been so good. With every breath that I am able, oh, I will sing of the goodness of God. I love your voice. You have led me through the fire, in darkest nights. You are close like no other. I've known you as a father. I've known you as a friend. And I have lived in the goodness of God. All my life you have been faithful. All my life you have been so good. With every breath that I take, oh, I will sing of the goodness of God. Oh, your goodness is running out, it's running after me. Your goodness is running out, it's running after me. My life laid down and surrender now. I give you everything. Your goodness is running out, it's running after me. Your goodness is running out, it's running after me. Your goodness is running out, it's running after me. My life laid down, surrender now. I give you everything.
Thank you. Thanks, Grace. So hopefully I have a bit of a better feel for kind of where we're at as a church. And so I'm just going to kind of jump us into kind of a bit of an overview in terms of kind of where I hope we see ourselves going for the next there we go. So kind of the overview of the next 4 weeks, as you're maybe thinking like, what have we gotten ourselves into? What I don't want this is, I've heard someone say, like, to be drinking out of a fire hose, right? Where there's just information coming at you and you're feeling blasted. What I really hope is that this is a sense of a chance to kind of encourage you to kind of get some questions thinking just around of kind of where you are at. And so how I've structured the next 4 weeks is today's going to be kind of more of a general overview of some of the key lessons that we have learned as a church that have really been fundamental for us in terms of all the decisions that we make. And then in week 2, we're going to talk specifically about finances, about capital campaign, and about the use of our building. In 2020, we started a capital campaign to raise $2 million. And we started it the 3rd week of March. I'll talk more about that. Not the best timing, but I'll talk a little bit about how that worked and just what this meant for us. I'll talk about my approach around finances as a church. I know it's oftentimes just a lot of conversations there. 3rd week is going to be talking about outreach, ways that we reach out into our community, the ways that we connect with our community. And then the final week will be around discipleship, about how do we grow in our faith? How do we always help? The language we use is take their next step to be closer to Jesus. And so over the next 4 weeks, kind of the key lessons learned will continue to kind of show up. And so as a church, I'm sure as many of you, we have a mission statement, and it's simply this: we want to lead people to Jesus so lives are transformed and our communities impacted for good. Everything we do comes back to this. And so we regularly talk about this. This is not just simply something that kind of goes up on the wall, but it becomes a conversation. And so out of that, we've developed a strategy, we've developed a vision, but that's not where I want to go with these conversations, because there are probably capable individuals in your congregation or that you know that can help you in terms of develop this. Because ultimately, I think for the majority of churches, you know, we talk about wanting to love God with everything and to love others as we love ourselves. So today I'm not going to talk so much about how do you develop a vision or how do you come up with a strategic plan. Listen, if you want to go offline with me later on, I'd be more than happy to kind of talk with you. But what I want to kind of share with you a little bit is one of the most important lessons that we are learning as a church, and that is culture is key. Peter Drucker, a great leader in the business world, says culture eats strategy for breakfast. And and what it means that you can have a great strategy, you can have a great vision, but if you have a poor culture, that's going to win the day. And culture happens whether we want it or not. And so how do we be intentional? And so when I talk about culture and the importance of congregations recognizing culture, what I mean is in two ways. One is, first of all, the culture or the community that you are a part of, based on if you're rural, if you're more urban, if you just based on if you're a growing community, if you're a declining community. Like, I think one of the most important things that you can do as a church is understand the community you're in. My 3 years, my 4 years in Malawi taught me this lesson, that you need to understand culture, because you may be doing something, it may be great, it may be amazing, but if it doesn't relate to the culture, the community that you are in, it's going to fall flat. And so one of the things that we continually do around culture and understanding our community is we go out and we try to figure out, what is it that our community needs? What is it that our community is lacking? And so it's often been said, this is not original with me, but one of the clarifying questions for us is, if your church were to disappear tomorrow, would anyone in your community notice? Notice it's not would anyone in your church notice, because 100% they would, but would anyone in your community notice? And I think that really speaks to culture, of understanding your culture and understanding the community that you're in. The second element of culture is then, what is the culture that you are creating within your church? Because hopefully you get to a place where people become intrigued and people want to come and be a part of what you are doing. A lot of what we do in terms of outreach is to make people curious, is to put people in a position where they're like, I would like to hear and to see more. And what can just absolutely push you forward or cause major decline is the culture in your church. And so that's kind of what has become significant for us. And so when we talk about our strategic plan, when we talk about our vision, it's not an isolation of culture. Culture drives our conversation and our decisions in terms of the culture that we're wanting to reach and the culture that we are wanting to create. And so culture really kind of leads the way in terms of what that looks like. So I'm going to talk about just some of the key elements of our culture that we've wanted to develop. And some of this may resonate with you, and others you're like, no, that's kind of not where we're going. Because I think one of the gifts of the community of faith is that we can portray the love of Christ in different ways. It's not a cookie cutter mentality. It's not like a church in Paris should be the same as a church in Saskatchewan or in BC or in the Maritimes. And so here's some of our core values. Number one is we talk a lot about being for Paris. A number of years ago, we basically shrunk our mission statement and our vision. And really, in many ways, everything that we want people to know initially about us, is that we are for Paris. Now, this got us into a little bit of, some people got into like some semantics with us because we have other communities coming in. They're like, well, what about for Brantford? I'm like, okay, let's get beyond the language and just understand that what it means is, first and foremost, we want people to know that God is for them, that God is for you. Oftentimes in the media, oftentimes Christians and churches are known not by what we are for, but what we are against. And I think we do ourselves a disservice when we get caught up in the culture wars of the day, whatever it may be, whether it's sexuality, whether it's politics, whatever it might be. And it's not to say we don't have thoughts on this and we don't hold a position on this, but it's not where we want to start. And so we talk about being for Paris, that God is for you and our church is for you as well. And so this really becomes a tagline. You see it on everything that we produce. We talk about it every week. It's included in our welcome every Sunday morning. We talk about we are for Paris. That means God is for you and we want to be for you as well. And immediately it speaks to our posture. It speaks to wanting to kind of connect where people are at. We've pushed this so far that we've actually renamed our building. And I'll talk more about this next week, where we're now referred to as the For Paris Center. And so the language is Paris Community Church meets in the For Paris Center. And part of the reason for that, part of the strategy around that, is that we wanted our building to be for our community as well. And so it's just a continual kind of conversation around that. Second core value for us is to be invitational. One thing we constantly talk about is how faith is personal, that people come to faith in Jesus as a choice that they make, but it's never meant to be private. And so as a church, one of the strategies is we don't have an evangelism committee, because we believe that sharing the good news of Jesus is opportunities for all of us. And so we talk a lot about being invitational. We talk about this within our leadership, within our staff, on Sunday mornings. And so we're constantly talking about how can you become invitational? And understand, this isn't just invitational in terms of how do we invite people to come to church, but how are we invitational with our lives? And so how are we invitational in terms of inviting people into our homes or getting to know our neighbors, and then perhaps inviting them to some of the different ministries that we're doing? So for us as a church, if our core value, if our culture is to be invitational, what we want is to create opportunities for people to be able to invite their friends and their family too. And so we talk about it all the time. So we give out invite cards. This last Christmas, for our Christmas candlelight services, we developed a Christmas card. And within it, we gave it out. We printed off about 2,000 of these. And in it was a Christmas card. And as part of it, it included some of the details of our Christmas candlelight services. And so we gave it to our people and said, hey, listen, here are Christmas cards you can give to others, and use it as a means to invite people to come and to join you. And so some of the language around what we do is we don't just simply say, hey, we would love for you to join us. We assume that. We begin to talk like, we would love for you to invite someone to this. And so it's a key principle for us in terms of being invitational. Third one is we want to have an accessible encounter. And this is huge for us, because if we're asking our people to invite others to come and be a part of what we are doing, it has to be accessible to those who perhaps have never stepped foot in a church, or have some sort of like, I'm not so sure. Maybe they've had like an unhelpful experience in the past. And so one of the questions we're always asking ourselves is, how are we relating to people? And how would what we are doing, whether it's on a Sunday morning or in small groups or whether it's through Alpha, how would this come across to someone who's entirely new to church? And so we want to be aware of that. And one of the ways you find answers to that is you ask people who are new and who are coming. And so what's important for us is that on a Sunday morning, we're consistent in terms of what we do. People can know what it is they're inviting others to. We put a high emphasis on what we call our first impressions team. I always tell so we have three levels of first impressions. We have outside greeters, and so we have people on the street, even when it's minus 15 degrees. We're like, bundle up, get warm, get out on the street and just welcome people as they come. And we always say, listen, we want to be welcoming, but not smothering, right? Like you wanna put your most welcoming and emotionally intelligent people in your first impressions team. Then they come into the doors and there's people who welcome them as they come in. We have a welcome table. We have coffee and tea that is served in the sanctuary. And so people come into the room. And then we have kind of what we call roamers. And so you could call them ushers, but people who are just kind of in the sanctuary, going up, saying hello, welcoming people, just asking people if they are comfortable. And so we want the very first impression to be a good one, because I tell our first impressions team, listen, if people show up and they are warmly welcomed and they feel that they belong, that even if they may not love the music, or if I completely drop the ball on my message, they're likely to come back more so than if they loved the music and the message was knocked out of the park, if they felt like they weren't warmly welcomed when they came. And so we talk a lot about accessible encounter. One of the taglines we use is that you can belong even before you believe. And so we talk about what we believe, but we don't land at the place or assume that everyone's at the same place. And so for those of you that are pastors or communicators, we're very conscious about how we pray, how the language we use, how I preach. I never make the assumption that people know what is in the Bible before we talk about it. And so I never make the reference of, well, you know, when Paul said this to the church in Ephesus, they're probably thinking, well, who is Paul? What is Ephesus? And now I feel dumb because I didn't know this, right? So it's the little things around making people comfortable. We go to the part where if like we have Bibles in the pews where I tell them it's on this page in the Bible. And so for those people that come regularly, they're like, they get it, they understand it, but we want people to feel comfortable. And then the last one, and then we're going to kind of open up for some Q&A. So I realize I've been talking a lot, but the last one, and this is critical, is to embrace change. We want a culture that doesn't simply talk about change, that doesn't simply tolerate change, but embraces change. And I think one of the things that you need to talk about as a leadership is, what is your level of risk? And I realized that one of the ways, if you truly want to be a church that is reaching the community, is that you are making changes for the benefit of those that are not even there yet. And so we talk a lot about, we value purpose over preference. And this can come to style, this can come to various types of ministries, this can come to use of budget, this can come to music. We understand everyone has a preference, but does it suit our purpose? And so one of the questions that we often ask ourselves as a leadership is, are we trying to guard our preferences or our tradition, or are we open to change? And so some of the more significant changes that we made came through COVID. We really saw this as an opportunity, as a bit of a reset, as a bit of a relaunch. But I think it's so important that as a church, you just have the open conversation around how do you embrace change. And so I'll share 3 examples just from our church. You're not kind of wondering, well, like what exactly is this all about? Because there's constant opportunities that will be presented to you where you have the choice to say, hey, we can either just continue to do it as we've always done it, or we can embrace change and take a step of faith. And so let me explain 3 of them that happened for us. Coffee. I'm sure nobody would object to having coffee at church. The question is, well, where do you serve the coffee? And so prior to COVID, we had our sanctuary, and then you'd have to go out of the sanctuary into another room to have coffee. Post-COVID, we're like, you know what? If we really want to reach people, if we really want to build a sense of community, we're going to serve coffee right in the sanctuary. And so, and I'm a bit of I love my coffee. And so I was like, listen, we are only going to serve good coffee. Now, you may debate with me the definition of good coffee. My definition of good coffee is strong Starbucks. But we want to serve good coffee, good baking, and quality. And so I think it's so important. And so we moved serving coffee into the sanctuary. So we built a coffee bar, and coffee is available. Our service is at 10:30, and coffee is served as of 10 o'clock. And it's served throughout the entire service because we want people to feel comfortable. And so one of the things that we say from the front is we talk about coffee every week. We say, if you haven't grabbed a cup of coffee, feel free to get up and go and get a cup of coffee whenever you want. And I've told specific leaders in my church, you need to get up and go get a cup of coffee while I am speaking. Because if you don't, nobody else will. And what it's done is it's created more of an environment, a culture of people wanting to hang out together. And so we find that people come early, and then people stay late. We always talk about, hey, don't be in a rush, like linger longer. And so we've talked about that. Well, when we first introduced this, there was a number of people like, what about coffee stains? What about this? What about that? And I said, listen, let's just give it a chance. Let's just see. And I've had people who've come to me and said, one of the best changes we've made as a church was our approach to coffee. Second example is Christmas candlelight services. I'm sure we all have a Christmas Eve service. One of the things that we were finding over the last couple of years is that particularly if we were wanting to reach out to new people, people who've never been to church, and invite them to Christmas Eve. Listen, Christmas is the best time to invite. And so we put a ton of emphasis into this. The problem is next to New Year's Eve, and I'd even argue Christmas Eve is probably the number one place. People who don't go to church, they're typically doing other things. And so as much as they would maybe like to come to church with you, they're not going to give up appetizers at their friends or dinner with mom. And so what we deliberately did this year is we ran 2 identical Christmas Eve services, one on the 24th and one on the 22nd. And I said, listen, with our leadership, with our musicians and everything that we're going to do, they have to be identical. So if we don't get buy-in on the 22nd, if it means that it's a person up there with a guitar and that's it, that's what we're going to do for both services. Because I didn't want to have, well, 22nd is okay, but the 24th is when you want to be there. And we had pushback at start. People weren't quite understanding it. But then as we started to talk more about it and said, this is a great way to invite, people got on board. And so typically Christmas Eve, we would have last year, kind of as the best measure, about 380 people at our Christmas Eve service. This year we had 610 people at the combined services. And so we immediately saw the impact that was happening. And the final change I'll talk about is the name change. We're formerly known as Paris Presbyterian Church, but we were finding that the word Presbyterian was tripping people up in terms of people that didn't know what it meant, perhaps had unhelpful views around it. And so it was a conversation that the elders had within session for about 6 months. And then we presented the congregation that we were going to change our name. We didn't say this is what it's going to be, but this is what it was going to become. But we talked about the change always backed up by our vision of we want to create a culture that builds community and reaches those who don't know Jesus. And so this is not just my personal preference. We believe this is purpose. And I got pushback. People are like, I can't believe why we're doing this. What difference is it going to make? And so we went through a process. I can talk a little bit more about that if people are interested. But we ended up opening up the congregation to offer us suggestions around what they would like the name to be. And then ultimately leadership made the decision and we landed at Paris Community Church. Logistically, it's been a slight challenge kind of making the name change. But it has been just amazing to see the impact that is having. And so we regularly talk about how as a church we want to be engaged in change. We want to be engaged in that if we want to lead people to Jesus, so lives are transformed and our community is impacted for good, then there are things that we need to be changing in the midst of what we do. Listen, the message, the good news of Jesus, that never changes, but the method does. And I think the method is dependent upon where you're located, who you have, and ultimately who you are wanting to reach. And so just one final thought, and then we'll open up for Q&A. You guys have been amazing listening to me. Final thought is that it takes time, right? This is not a silver bullet strategy. I wish I had one. I wish I could give it. I would send it to you. What we're noticing are the results today, the growth we're experiencing today is from initiatives we took 18 months earlier. And so it's not a quick fix. It doesn't happen overnight. And so the three things I say is be intentional. Be intentional about what you're doing and evaluate the changes you make, not within the first week, right? I always tell people when we make changes, we are going to give it a run of 12 to 18 months. We want to run it through at least a cycle of a year on significant changes so that we can properly evaluate and what it is. And so that way people know, listen, if it's not working, we're not going to continue to do it, but we have to give ourselves some time to see if it's actually going to work. Second thing to do is, knowing it takes time, is celebrate wins. And so that little video is an example of celebrating the wins. And so we love to show pictures. We love to give testimony. We love to follow up. We always love to let people know of the great things that God is doing. And one of the big ones is, in order to build culture, battle discouragement. During COVID, probably one of the number one focuses that I had for our church was to be an encourager, because discouragement, I think, is perhaps one of the greatest strategies of Satan. I'm currently doing a series on the supernatural, and in 2 weeks, I'm talking about like the strategies of Satan, and it's less about him being the boogeyman and about him trying to scare us. It's about discouraging us. I love that passage in, I believe in Ephesians, it says, like, do not grow weary in doing good. Like one of our team leads has that up in their office. It's like, do not grow weary, which means there is going to be a time where you're like, and maybe you're there, like maybe you're discouraged and you're struggling. I just hope this is a real kind of encouragement for you. So I'll leave this slide up, but we can jump into Q&As. But maybe some things to think about. As a church, how would you describe your culture? Do people know God is for them? Are you for them? Do you embrace change? Are you invitational? And how accessible are you? How comfortable will people feel coming into your church? So that's all I've got for this week. So the next 3 weeks, I'm going to dive into specific ways that we see this happening. And so I know it's a lot of me talking at you, but we're going to share more stories, how this works for us with our building, with finances, with discipleship, and with outreach. And so the Amazing Grace is going to facilitate Q&A. So I don't know if you have any questions or any comments, but I'll do my best.
So for the Q&A portion, at the bottom of your screen, you should see a little button that says raise hand. If you don't see it there, it might be under more. So if you have a question, feel free to click that or put your question in the chat. If you're having trouble finding anything, you can message me directly. I have two questions from the chat if you want to start there. One from Robert. Joel, you spoke of 2 Christmas Eve services. What time do you hold them on the 22nd and the 24th? Did you replace your regular service on the 22nd?
Yeah, thanks for the question. Yeah, we did. I forgot to mention that. So we didn't run a December 22nd morning service. And so what we wanted was for people to come. And so we run our services at 6:30 p.m. And we run them for less than an hour. So they're about 55 minutes long. And so they were identical, 6:30 on the Sunday, and then 6:30 on the 24th as well. And so what we're now doing is we're now evaluating it, and we're saying, hey, how did that work? And so next year we're looking at potentially running multiple services on multiple days, or running over a span of 3 days. And to be honest, like, this was as much a pride thing for me in some ways, because yeah, I feel great when the church is packed on Christmas Eve. And I was like, are we going to split it? Are people not going to come? Like, I was nervous on the Sunday night. I was like, what's it going to look like in terms of people coming? But when you make these changes, you at least are giving yourself an opportunity to say, hey, this really worked well, or it didn't work at all. We're not going to do it again. And so at least you take the conversation out of the theoretical and land it there. So thanks, Robert. Great question.
Okay. Seeing no hands yet, I have another question from the chat. Regarding the name change, how did this work with the PCC and the presbytery?
We told them what we were doing, and so you're able to change the name of your church. I mean, there is some government documents that obviously have to be taken care of, and so we didn't need to go to the presbytery to receive permission, or the national church. I checked in with them to make sure that we weren't going down a path that we weren't allowed to do, but we just simply informed them of that, and then began to take the necessary steps. In terms of a legal name change, you can have a lawyer help you with the government aspects of it. Or if you have just someone who's a volunteer or staff member who's dedicated to just putting in some time, that also can be done. So, but we didn't need specific permission to change. And so when we changed our name, we talked, like I spoke about, listen, like, this is a name that again is going to be accessible to people. I went out and I spoke to people. I spoke to there's a guy in our church who owns a number of businesses, and he was changing the name of his business. And the best advice he gave me was, when choosing a name, let them know where you are, what you do, and what's important. And so those are the three elements we hit. We're in Paris, community is important, and we're a church. We didn't want to bait and switch, right? Like, so when suggestions came in, community was at the heart of what happened. We had about 45 submissions come in, and so it actually turned from a point of like some people are a little uncertain to a place where people were excited. And back to my initial point earlier on, when I said, if anyone in your community, if your church was to close down, would anyone in your community notice? When we changed our name, I had people from the community calling with a bit of panic. They're like, "Wait, are you guys gone? Like, what's going on?" I said, "No, we're still here. We're still doing our thing. It's just we love community so much that we've replaced Presbyterian with it." So, yeah, that's kind of where we land.
Great. We've gotten a number of questions. Put it in the chat. Put it in the chat. But just a reminder, people can feel free to use the raise hand to ask the question yourself. But I'm happy to continue to read them out. Another question: congregation members are open to change but never participate or practice in it. What's your response? Mhm.
Open to change, yeah. So we try to get people as involved as we can. And so, for example, the name change, we ask for feedback. Um, we always want people to kind of take ownership within it. And so we believe that, session really helps set the vision and the strategy. But in terms of getting people involved, one of the metrics that we are learning is that on the front edge of growth is people serving. And so the more people you get serving, the more impact you'll see in the church. And so one of the ways that we get people involved in change is we're updating people in terms of the conversations that we're having, and we're asking for their feedback. And it's not always necessarily the feedback we thought, and then we try to address it. So for example, when we changed to not having a morning service, a few of our seniors reached out and said, "Hey, I love what you're doing, but I don't drive at night. And so now I can't come to the morning service or to the evening service." And I was like, we never thought of that. And I apologized, and we set up drivers, and we went around and picked up whoever needed to be there. And what that did was they're like, "Hey, wait a second. My voice was heard." And so I never look at obstacles or people being upset as necessarily a bad thing. That I actually think it's good. When everyone agrees with me, I'm like, "Oh boy, this is not good," right? So getting people involved is important. And so also have easy entry points in terms of serving. And so one of the approaches that we take is, for new people coming, we try to get them plugged in more with either Alpha, and I'll talk about that in a couple of weeks, or with one of our serving teams. And the best place to have new people serving is as your first impressions, as your greeters. And new people are always like, I can't welcome people. I'm new. And I'm like, that's your line. When people come and say, "Hey, I have this question," be like, "You know what? I'm new. I've only been here 2 weeks. I would like to find that out as well." And then we find people who can help them. But look for ways to plug people in to what you are already doing. I hope I answered that.
Another question from Penny: how do you balance making a more modern approach for the younger groups, an example being same-sex marriage, without offending your base group, an example being seniors, who do most of your volunteer work?
Ask me that again.
Sure. How do you balance taking a more modern approach for the younger group without offending your base group?
Um, for me, it's really about talking about purpose. It's really again talking about, I think it's the culture. And so um I've had people come to a place where they may recognize that we may not agree on this. But that they are heard and that they can belong. And so I mean, I'm not going to get too into the weeds on this. I can offline if you'd like, but with regards to the remits that went down around same-sex marriage, so full disclosure, I hold a traditional view when it comes to marriage. Not everyone in our church does. We have elders who do not hold the same view of marriage as I do. We have same-sex couples as a part of our church and also serving in our church. And so one of the things that we have done is just continue to create a space where people can belong and can understand where they are at. And so how we handled all those remits, I think in many ways helped us create a culture. And so I have no intention of leaving the denomination. Our church had no desire to step out either. And so we sometimes have to find what is often referred to as the third way. And so how do we navigate some of these challenging conversations? I mean, we've transitioned from when it was the minister would wear a full robe, collar, gowns, and whatnot, a more traditional service, where we are much more casual. Last Sunday, I preached in jeans and a t-shirt, which some people love and some people are like, buddy, come on, get your act together. And so we just continually talk about that. In terms of music, the pipe organ is played every week, but we have a full band as well, and so we incorporate it all together. And so it's kind of always talk about the decisions you're making is because of the vision and the direction you're wanting to go. If there's a specific instance, then I'm easier to kind of talk about those.
I think that your sort of the crux of that answer was talking a lot about culture. And I have another question here, which is how did you approach determining the church's culture? Was it through a workshop, a survey, observations? Who was involved, and was it internally or externally facilitated?
Great question. Yeah. So we talked a lot about who would be the ideal person um, that we want representing our church. And without naming names, we didn't do this, but I'm sure there are people in your church where you're like, wow, if we had more people like Joe or more people like Sue, this place would be awesome. And so we talked about that and we said, who are the Joes and the Sues and what are these core values that they have that we want? On the flip side, we think, who are some of the people in our church that we hope new people never meet for the first time? All right, maybe they're not in your church, right? But what are the things about them that are unhelpful? And so yeah, so yeah, this has been a process. Like we have brought in people, and I find it is most helpful to bring in an outside facilitator to talk about vision, to talk about strategy, and then to really lay out culture. Culture takes the longest to develop because it develops out of who you are becoming. And so when we developed vision, I spent an entire summer thinking and praying. Then we brought someone in to help work us through it. Then we brought in two different people to help us work through strategy. But in the midst of it all, we talked about what is the culture that we want. And so we want, another element I didn't talk about in this is we want to be generous. And so I'll talk about that next week of if we want people to be generous, then we have to talk about money. It can't be a hush hush thing, but we need to celebrate it and talk about it. And so really, it was both internal and external, and we thought through what is the church that we want to become moving forward.
Great. Let's see if we have time for one more. Um, from Kyle. These sound like great strategies, especially for a multi-staff congregation. What are some expectations for a single staff congregation?
Yeah, fair question. So I don't think culture costs you anything. I think some of the things that we're talking about, you can start to implement. So we have no full-time staff. I'm 75%. We have a woman who oversees our music ministry. She's so if you added it all up, we are slightly above one full-time staff member. We did have a larger staff at the time, but we have shrunk that for a variety of reasons. So I think, yeah, I think again, like this comes into strategy around understanding where you are, what it is you're wanting to do. And when we talk about looking at strategy, we have a 1, a 3, and a 10-year vision. And so that we continue to come back to. And so realistically, you may look at it and think, okay, like what are some of the things that we can start to implement today? And it could be simply in terms of culture, how do you use more accessible language when you pray, when you speak, with some of the songs that you use. I'll talk about this in the next couple of weeks as well when it comes to how do you create outreach or look for new opportunities. So yeah, so I realize that you don't want to jump into a place where you're like, okay, well, we're only this size, and so what can we do? What I'd say is look at some of the principles and then start to develop those. And so how do you develop a culture of invitation? I mean, the best inviters are the people that are new. And so get people up there, have people share stories of how they came, of why they came. And so I get what you're saying, Kyle, but I'd say look at your context, look at what your current resources are, and then step into it and say, this is what we are going to do. Don't be all things to all people. If there's another church doing something that's amazing, then maybe you don't have to do that. One of the things that we've done is we've partnered with other churches to run our summer kids camps and part of our youth programs so that we can combine resources and do things together.
Karen, you have your hand up and you can go ahead and unmute.
Hi, Joel. I just want to thank you for today and everyone who has participated. If you had a question in the Q&A or in the chat that wasn't answered today, we're going to download them so Joel will have and see what the questions were and be sure to address them in the upcoming 3 weeks. I'm just so excited to hear Joel's stories. I've known him since he was mission staff in Malawi and watched him progress through his ministry, actually even before he went to Malawi, but particularly in Malawi. And every time I talk to him and he shares to me what their congregation is doing, I get excited about it and what our church is doing, which is why I invited him to share. And I think if you continue to come for the next 3 weeks, we're going to continue to go deeper. We recognized the story was too big just to cover in 1 week. So we said, let's do 4 weeks in smaller pieces. So hope to see you next week and thank you very much.